Okay, so the deals keep coming, and there's reason to believe Howie's not done. With a DeVonta Smith extension in the works, plus a physical wide receiver gets an official visit with the Eagles, while Philly's showing more interest in the top linebacker in the class. And even though analytics doubt Devin White's ability, why can we expect him to be a game changer on the field? Let's talk about it. But first, let's run it. Hey guys, alright, I'm dealing with a little bit of a cold and sorry about the voice, but we're gonna get through this. Because despite how sick I might be, it's not nearly as sick as Tennessee fans realizing the terrible mistake to trade A.J. Brown to Philly.
Do you realize what you've done?
After the Titans signed Calvin Ridley on a 4-year deal worth $92 million and $50 million guaranteed. Which, for those of you not sure, is about the same as AJ's contract since the Eagles have him for 4 years and $100 million with 57 of that guaranteed. Except he's 26 and Ridley's 29. Further cementing the fact that the Tennessee organization had no clue what it was doing.
Years later, a doctor will tell me that I have an IQ of 48.
In fairness, yes, I realize the current regime is not the one who made the mistake of the past one in getting rid of A.J. Brown. However, I can't help but get a kick out of how poorly they managed the whole situation. Although, in further fairness, we've had our own share of wide receiver blunders. Okay, yeah, quite a few in fact. Yet the good news is we're past that and have the best duo in the league. And like we've seen, when you have those dudes, you pay them, which is what we should expect the Eagles to do with DeVonta Smith. Especially considering that Howie Roseman hinted at the Combine about getting an extension done this offseason, citing that he doesn't want homegrown talent to leave. Of course, seeing Ridley's contract is a no-doubter that you're going to have to pay up for Smitty, with the 25-year-old not only making ridiculous catches with regularity, but proving all the haters wrong, missing just one game in his entire career since entering the league. So let's see, you've got the Slim Reaper, who's 4 years younger, has shown more production, more consistency, and just a better overall teammate than Ridley. Yep, Devonta's getting a contract well over Ridley's number, which no one in their right mind is going to argue that. But it does bring into question, as some Twitter folks started speculating, how will AJ handle the news once Smitty's contract overtakes his?
Why did you bring that up? Yeah.
Okay, you're right, and honestly, I don't think that it's going to bother Swole Batman at all. I mean, come on, he loves Smitty.
My boy Smitty. Hey, y'all, Smitty's so cold, y'all. Smitty's so cold, y'all.
Seriously, they all know how this works. It's just a giant game of NFL contract leapfrog. Smitty overtakes AJ, and then AJ plays really well and then surpasses him, and so on and so forth. Plus, seeing how the two interact on and off the field, I'm not worried about it changing the dynamics at all. But I don't know, where are y'all at with all this? While we're on the topic of receiver, the Birds have definitely showed some interest in other wideouts for the draft. After Andrew DeCecco reported that the Eagles have a top 30 visit with USC wide receiver Brendan Rice in April. By the way, yes, that is Jerry Rice's son that we're talking about, who played 2 seasons at Colorado before transferring to USC for his final 2 years as he racked up 76 catches for over 1,200 yards and 15 touchdowns. And sure, the production may not have been there like some of the other receivers, but at 6'3", 210 pounds and running a 4.5 40, he's garnering attention from multiple teams. Also worth pointing out that he's been described by multiple scouts as a player who never takes a play off, so you gotta love that. Now, on the flip side, his change of direction can be a little slow, and he doesn't seem to have a special top gear to separate. But overall, it seems like he's a late day 2 pick or like an early day 3 pick, so at least worth keeping an eye on. Another top 30 visit, which is honestly my favorite up to this point, is Texas A&M's Edgerrin Cooper, after Ryan Fowler officially broke that news, suggesting the Birds are taking linebacker very seriously in the draft. Like, in order to draft this dude, you gotta take him probably early round 2. And I've talked about him before, but Cooper's continued to move up draft boards at 6'2", 230 pounds, and a unique ability to make plays all over the field, with 83 tackles and 8 sacks last season, including 2 forced fumbles and 1 fumble recovery. This just feels like a Vic Fangio linebacker, and even more so when you look at the recent moves the Eagles have made to bolster the backer unit. Because even though they added Zach Bond and Oren Burks as well as Devin White, they're all on 1-year deals. However, let's talk about the Devin White acquisition for a sec, since I've seen quite a few people knocking Howie signing the 26-year-old linebacker. And fine, I get it since he's not a good run-stopping linebacker. However, the dude ranked as the second best LB in coverage last season, only allowing 61.9% completion percentage, and also had the most pressures from blitzes last year as well. But again, I don't want to sugarcoat it, White had some terrible games. Yet let's remember, Malcolm Jenkins was the worst graded safety in the NFL the year Philly signed him, and there's no question that worked out. For the record, I'm not saying I expect Devin White to have that kind of drastic resurgence, but on a prove-it deal and tons of athleticism, the potential is definitely there, which is why I caught up with Pro Football Network's Anthony DiBona super early this morning, as if you couldn't tell from my eyes, to break down all the latest Eagles free agency moves.
It's been crazy, and let's start with the most recent signing of Oren Burks.
And that's a name that, people not quite as familiar with. Honestly, I had to look it up and do some research myself and seeing some of the tweets and info that you put out there. But it's a linebacker with some potential. What should be, I guess, the ultimate expectations? And I guess also just curious general thoughts on the signing there of Oren Burks.
I mean, I think it was another kind of low risk flyer for Howie Roseman at linebacker, kind of like Zach Bond, where the guy is 27, 28, while Burks is 28. So he's been behind two of the best linebackers in the game in San Francisco for 2 years or so, and then he was in Green Bay before that. So, I mean, he got a couple opportunities last season. He unfortunately got picked apart in the Super Bowl by Patrick Mahomes, but who doesn't? So that's not that much of a knock. So, but I mean, he's a bigger guy, 6'3", 230. He has a lot of athletic traits. He rushed the passer really well last season, even though he's an off-ball linebacker. So it's interesting to see both him and I guess we'll talk about Devin White in a bit, but both of them are kind of, well, Burks is a little bit a much smaller sample size, but Devin White is one of the best blitzing linebackers in the league, and now they add Burks, who's shown some potential there as well. So that's interesting to note, and I think it's worth to taking a shot on. Like the report was up to 2.5 million, so it might even be like a veteran minimum contract with some incentives there. So if it works, it works. If not, he'll just be like a core special teams player. Really no risk there at trying to sign him.
Okay, so let's talk about the Devin White. Let's go there next. Obviously, Howie's made some good moves. He's made some other moves that, people would say are not so great. We'll get into the Kenny Pickett and everything else, but they're polarizing, and some of them are, low risk, high reward. I get that there's some places rated of Devin White not being a highly graded linebacker, and there's other arguments against that. But where are you at in terms of Devin White for the Eagles? What sense he makes, and possibility of why is he better than some people might expect or think?
Well, I think people are just too caught up in the analytics, and like you said, on social media, it's easy to bring down a player when their PFF grade or whatever the case might be is so low. But I mean, you've seen the potential with Devin White. He's still very young. Maybe a change of scenery will help. He's talked about playing in green before. He flirted with the Eagles last offseason. So it's also interesting to see Howie Roseman kind of break his tendency of not really investing in big names at linebacker. He kind of usually goes for the bargain bin guys where they might have played a little bit here and there, but now he's kind of hoping that they're an ascending player like he did with Zach Cunningham or Nicholas Morrow last year. So I mean, it's kind of him breaking his pattern. Let's see if it works. It's another low-risk, high-reward signing because we've seen Devin White play at a All-Pro, Pro Bowl level where he was rated as like a top 25 or so player by other players in the NFL. And, I mean, it's hard to take everything PFF says for a fact because they hated Malcolm Jenkins before he signed with the Eagles, and then look what happened. So, I mean, you always have to give a player a chance, a different scenery. Vic Fangio knows what he's doing. He's a great defensive play caller, so it's worth the risk. It's not like they threw $30 million guaranteed for multiple years. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it's really no big deal. It's another reported signing that's up to $7.5 million or whatever the case might be. So it's not going to be much guaranteed money. The Eagles still have plenty of money to work with, and obviously the draft to assess linebacker as well. So
I think that's the main part. Like you say, it's up to 7.5. It's a prove it to me contract deal. Devin White gets to go out there and, hopefully kind of reassert himself in a way, get a bigger contract if he does. Maybe he stays in Philly, maybe not. But, I see it as a positive. Again, I think it's to your point and well taken of some people that, just want to go off of the analytics and everything else. It, to me, says a little bit more when your peers are still talking you up despite whatever the analytics might say about a player. So anyway, we'll see. I'm glad that they're going after linebacker. I think a lot of people are. But curious because you mentioned the draft. I've tried to continue this, and I don't think that it changes it, but I'm interested to get your take on it. I want Howie to draft a linebacker, and I want him to draft a linebacker fairly early. There's a number of names that we could throw out there, but this is only a one-year deal, like you mentioned, for Devin White. One-year deal for Oren Burks. He's getting some depth, but there's nothing long-term committal-wise. I mean, he's still got Nakobe Dean, who he believes in, and probably will be the foreseeable green dot wear if all things work out. But is there an increase in the likelihood that you see because there's not a long-term plan so far for another linebacker? Or maybe there is, just a different player on the roster, but an increase of them to possibly spend on an early draft pick for linebackers still, given the moves that they've made?
I think they have to, and they're kind of the way that their draft picks are laid out with 50, 53, and even 22, if they feel like they have to take a guy like Edgerrin Cooper there because he won't fall to 50. I feel like it's a possibility because, like you said, they really don't have any long-term investments. The only player that they can really rely on for the next couple of years, and in their eyes, is Nakobe Dean, and even he showed that he battled some injuries last season. So I mean, do they really have anybody past next season that they can look at and say he's our linebacker of the future? And I don't think they do. So, I mean, they're in the perfect spot to where with one of those first three picks, they can get one of the top linebackers, either if it's, like I said, Cooper or Peyton Wilson, Junior Colson, one of those guys. So obviously everybody loves Jeremiah Trotter Jr. So, I mean, if they can land any of those 4 or 5 guys, whatever the case might be, it'll help because having that guy locked in for the next 4 years at a position that you really haven't invested in is huge. So, I mean, the options will be there. It's just a matter of if they'll actually pull the trigger. I mean, they've already reportedly going to host Cooper on a top 30 visit. So that's a big sign of interest for the Eagles. So we'll just see how it goes.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too. Yes, the top 30 visits. We'll get into those a little bit more here in a second. But just in terms of meeting with Edgerrin Cooper, as we've seen in a number of years, top 30 visits, telling the signs or showing the signs of Howie Roseman, what the Eagles are possibly interested in, the fact that they might spend at a linebacker position early. I'm hopeful. Yes, I've said it a number of times, honestly. I mean, Edgerrin Cooper is the top for me. I would still be happy with a Peyton Wilson, still be happy with Junior Colson. Heck, again, like you're talking about with these other linebackers, it's like, who's your better option? We're trying to build this thing long-term while also still winning the present, and I think that getting those guys really makes a lot of help. So hopefully we see that. Do you feel like, just to stay on Edgerrin Cooper for a second, do you feel like Edgerrin Cooper could be the best fit or might be the best fit alongside Nakobe Dean, kind of given his strengths and weaknesses like you alluded to? Or if you could take your pick on this class, who fits best next to Nakobe Dean?
I think Cooper is just the best option, regardless of fit, who he's playing next to or what he can. And just based on what they're looking at this offseason, like I mentioned, Nakobe Dean, Zach Bond, Oren Burks, they've all shown flashes of pass rushing ability, and Devin White as well. So, I mean, there's no better pass rushing linebacker, off ball linebacker in the draft than Cooper, who had about 8 sacks or whatever the case might be last season. So, I mean, him having that potential, regardless of who's around him, if Nakobe Dean does work out long term or not, I just feel like Cooper's the best player to have in that situation, giving his sideline to sideline ability, his athletic ability, and of course his pass rushing ability. So, I mean, he's a seamless fit in basically any system and what everybody's looking for nowadays in an off ball linebacker. So that's why, to me, it wouldn't even be that crazy to take him at 22. I think he's that talented of a player. It's just a matter of if the Eagles will value an off ball linebacker that highly or not.
This is the multi-million-dollar question. I'm hopeful that they do to a certain extent. I will say that in my mind, I'm still considering the possibility or kind of hoping that we go corner first and then maybe package something. If you really want Edgerrin Cooper, you have to trade up early in the second round or something like that. He may be gone. He may be gone before then, like you mentioned. But I'm probably still a little bit higher on the corner position. But let's talk about, before we get into a little bit more of the draft and everything, let's talk about Kenny Pickett, because we're still talking or mentioning the moves that Howie Roseman has made, the polarizing. I don't think that there's a more polarizing move that we've seen from Howie Roseman this offseason so far than the Kenny Pickett trade. And maybe more so with the Justin Fields news breaking and him going to Pittsburgh. It's kind of the switcheroo in a way, because it's like, oh, hey, you traded away Kenny Pickett. What's going on with QB2? All of a sudden they bring in Justin Fields, especially given the draft, or I guess, what the teams gave away for the trades. All of a sudden, it blows up on Twitter. Like, you got to be kidding me. Eagles had to give up a top 100 pick for Kenny Pickett. Now, granted, they got back a 4th-round pick and 2 7ths, so you're getting some compensation back. But I want to hear your take, because I've heard a number of people in my comments on Twitter, everywhere else. So I know everybody's got an opinion. But overall, for you, was this a good move from Howie? And then also just kind of big picture wise too, given the ramifications of the Justin Fields trades and everything else, where are you at with Kenny Pickett in Philly?
I think it's a perfectly fine move. It reminds me of a lot of when they traded for Gardner Minshew in 2021. I mean, what the drop back that they made, the move back, is essentially equivalent to a 4th-round pick. So, I mean, whatever you want to think about, it's a 4th-round pick at the end of the day. It's not the biggest asset in the world. I know people are disappointed to lose a 3rd-round pick and drop back to day 3, but that's essentially what the value is when you go to look at the point chart. So, I mean, but the thing is, the difference is Justin Fields, and I tweeted this already, is Justin Fields has 1 year remaining on his contract. They can pick up his 5th-year option by May, which I don't believe any team that traded for him was going to do, because you don't want to lock yourself into that $25 million cap hit next season, because, I mean, look how hard it was to trade him this year on a much lower salary. And there's no guarantee anybody's going to trade for him at that number next season. So, I mean, Kenny Pickett has 2 years left and the fifth-year option that they could pick up next year. So, I mean, if they probably won't pick that up either, but the fact that he's locked in for 2 years, you pretty much know who your QB2 is going to be for the next 2 years, because Pickett, I mean, he hasn't been the greatest, obviously. He wasn't in the best situation. They fired their OC, whatever the case might have been there. He doesn't have the most talent besides George Pickens there. So, I mean, the situations are way different. The coaching is going to be way different. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. But the fact that they have a guy locked in for the next 2 years behind Jalen Hurts at $3 million total for the next 2 seasons or whatever it might be, compared to the contracts that you see backup signing this offseason. Marcus Mariota got $6 million. Sam Darnold got $10 million. So, I mean, you have to factor this in. And Howie Roseman kind of always values that backup quarterback spot. So, I mean, for him to lock in a guy for just a fourth-round pick essentially is not a big deal in my eyes. I think it's a perfectly fine move.
I'm right there with you. I mean, I've said it to, like I say, a ton of people, and I appreciate the comments for everybody in the comment section, everybody watching. You know, I totally understand if you're against it, disagree, whatever. But I, like you said, I think to me the biggest element, the biggest part to that is that you have more team control. You have the extra year with Kenny Pickett, and I'm okay with the draft selections there too, because like you also said, like the points wise, it's kind of like a fourth round pick. We've seen what Howie does with draft picks in the draft anyway. He can easily navigate his way if he wants to move up, move back, whatever. You got extra comp picks this year from last year's losses and all that. So to me, it's not a major deal, especially like I guess where I'm at is like I'm going to lean towards trusting Howie because of what decisions he's made in the past on QB, because I totally disagreed with the whole Jalen Hurts notion, and that's like great move, Howie, that's fantastic. So it's like he's done enough to prove and say, okay, he's seen enough to like Kenny Pickett, and he scouted him well before it was documented and everything else that he was interested beforehand anyway. But you got a chance to get your guy. You bring him here. Is there anything though to this, the disgruntled reports or, Kenny not being willing to, because who knows where this is coming from, but Kenny not being willing to compete with Russell Wilson. There was a report that Mike Tomlin might have, I don't know, in a way pulled the rug out from under him after the trade or the signing for Russell Wilson. But any concerns there, just to make sure as far as him, if there's some issues character-wise or something in Pittsburgh, or do you think he's going to be all right coming to Philly?
I think he kind of needed that change of scenery, because even before the Russell Wilson situation, they were kind of playing musical chairs at quarterback last season with him, Mason Rudolph, and Mitch Trubisky. So, I mean, it was kind of a toxic situation that he kind of needed a change of scenery. And the Eagles have a set situation. They know Jalen Hurts is the starting quarterback. There's not going to be any competition. I'm sure some radio shows or whatever might try and drum up some nonsense there, but I mean, it's a different situation. He grew up a fan of the team. I feel like that can't be discounted because it's different. I know he technically played for the Steelers, whatever the case might be, but these guys follow teams on the side. They'll never admit it. They'll root for teams on the side. So, I mean, being able to just be a Philadelphia Eagle probably means something to him where he might just not cause any drama or whatever. And I just feel like last season was toxic. Then apparently this offseason they told him that he's going to compete. And then they signed Russell Wilson. So he's not going to compete with Russell Wilson because of how he played last season. So, I mean, it was kind of just like a disrespect, I guess, towards him. But they know that they were done with him. He knows that they were done with them. So it's just best for both sides to move on to a more defined situation in Philadelphia where hopefully he embraces kind of learning and reestablishing his value, because he'll probably get a chance to play a couple games because Hurts is probably going to miss a game or two. So, I mean, whenever the case might be, he just needs to take advantage of that. And then if the Eagles can flip him next offseason for a pick or whatever the case might be, then we'll cross that bridge when that happens.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. I mean, if he plays, we hopefully he doesn't. Right? The ideal scenario is Jalen plays all the games, or I don't know. I guess you're locked up for playoffs and Kenny comes in for a couple games that don't even matter. But other than that, like you hope he doesn't have to play. But if he does, to your point, you maybe flip him and get a little more value on that side. Real quick before we move on from the quarterback, I was just going to ask another point here because I've had a number of comments on it as well, and you alluded to it a little bit already, but the whole Justin Fields situation, there was a report out there that Howie, I don't know the best way to phrase it, and it's kind of a little bit of a speculative, but that he did his investigation or maybe due diligence on Justin Fields, seeing what the price might be before moving on, or moving on may not be the right word, but just before going with the Kenny Pickett trade. Tons of people would say that's a total miss, but I mean, again, it's like you kind of trust Howie in these scenarios. You talked about the extra years of team control, things like that, but he was apparently, interested, even if he wasn't going to have as much control in those years. Ultimately, do you think that why would Howie have not pulled the trigger? Or because again, not all things are what they seem, and some teams are not offered the same, value wise. But do you feel like there's a miss there, or why should people be like, okay, hey, Howie did his due diligence, not a huge concern that he didn't pull the trigger on Justin Fields? Anything additional? I guess I know you mentioned the team control.
No, I think the team control is the main factor. I mean, obviously Justin Fields with what he can do with his legs can't be discounted, and I feel like if you do have to play the backup quarterback, obviously Fields, you won't have to change much of the offense because of what he can do with his legs. But I feel like that second year of team control was so important, and obviously we know that the trade value wasn't the difference because Fields got traded for less than Kenny Pickett got traded for essentially. So, I mean, but they both were former first round picks. They both have the fifth year option potential to be picked up. So, I mean, the fact that Kenny Pickett has one more year of value of team control under a very reasonable contract is super important because the Eagles won't want to have to deal with that constant turnover at quarterback two behind Jalen Hurts. They kind of want to have that steady guy that they can develop and rely on whenever needed. So, I mean, say Justin Fields, they traded for Justin Fields and he went out and played one or two games, played out of his mind, and then you just lose him in the offseason. I mean, sure, you can get a compensatory pick, but that depends on them not doing anything in free agency either to where it would cancel out that pick. So, I mean, it all depends on their future plans. I think having the guy under another year of control where you can potentially trade him next offseason is huge too, because like I said, if Pickett does play well, then you can kind of flip him for possibly a fourth or fifth round pick to kind of get that value back. So, I mean, it all depends on what happens, but I think there's pluses and minuses to both sides. So,
yeah, I'm with you. I think the side of again, I'm in favor of it. I think it's a good move. I'm not saying it's the best move that he's made this offseason. You could argue one of them, I think maybe most people will get into CJ Gardner Johnson. I feel like that's the biggest and best move that everyone would go with. His press conference was amazing. If people have not watched it, go check out his press conference. But Saquon Barkley's right up there near the top. Now, I know, financial ramifications and things like that, but general takeaways from Saquon Barkley, I've seen tweets and we've communicated back and forth, but first time to, hear it straight from you. Saquon Barkley to the Eagles. It's crazy that Howie did this, but what are your thoughts on Saquon and the impact he makes?
Well, I don't know if anybody saw it, but I think a lot of people did. Unfortunately, my 0.0% prediction that he would sign with the Eagles. I wasn't going to
bring that up, but you go
that kind of went viral, so that'll always be attached to Saquon Barkley from me. But I had fun with that. But yeah, it's wild because Howie Roseman kind of continues to break his patterns of over the last decade, where he wasn't signing big names at linebackers, he wasn't signing big running backs to huge contracts. So I mean, he's kind of breaking the mold this offseason, and it'll be exciting to see how it pans out. But, I mean, there's really not much to dislike about the move because with Barkley, it's another kind of – I mean, he has a decent amount of guaranteed money, but a lot of it's incentive-based, so we'll see how that works. And I feel like he's going to have the potential to, especially in Kellen Moore's offense, to where he can kind of be that receiver and running back at the same time, where that's essentially why they paid him so much, I think, is because he can kind of be their third wide receiver and their top running back because he's going to catch the ball 50, 60 plus times in a season if he's able to stay healthy, which he has been in the past couple of years, despite what people might say about him. So, I mean, I like the move. I feel like given the situation they have around him financially, they're able to make it work as well. So we'll see what happens. I mean, he adds another layer that they didn't really have at running back in the past couple of years because either before it was like they had to bring Kenny Gainwell in to pass protect or DeAndre Swift was going to run and they couldn't really trust him on pass protection. Now you can kind of have Barkley out there for all three downs. You're not really tipping your hand to the defense in any way. And that's going to help a lot because the guy can run. He can pass block, which is one of the best rates in the NFL. And he can obviously catch the ball. So, I mean, he adds another layer without having to change or do anything on the field.
I'm excited to see it, especially in Kellen Moore's offense, like you talked about. The extra layers, we know it's going to be changed dramatically, but you mentioned or you add this type of a player, and it's going to be crazy. I don't know, and I've said this a number of times, I don't know how long it's going to take me to realize that Saquon Barkley is an Eagle. Like, seeing the press conference even, I'm still like, what? He's in Philly? Like, he's going to be an Eagle? It might just be the first game where it's like, the handoff to Saquon Barkley is like, okay, it's official. He actually is a Philadelphia Eagle. It's wild to see him there. But you're right. I think the weapon that he is, and I think that's why at first whenever I heard the news, I was kind of like, great, phenomenal. But then contract, I'm going, gosh, do you spend that much money? Because Howie never does that. Again, like to your 0% chance, like he never does that. And so I was with you. I was like, nope, I don't think that he will either. Obviously he does. But the more that I think about this, it's like, okay, if you view him as just a weapon on the offense, and he can be another option for receiver, kind of that, wide receiver 3 at times. They're going to probably have someone else naturally, but still a weapon out there on the offense. Then it changes, the viewpoint somewhat. I think he's going to be dynamic for sure. And then you made a great point also about the health. I mean, DeAndre Swift, the knock on him was staying healthy. He did. He finally stayed healthy this past year, but you look at the past couple of years, I mean, it's about the same games missed for both players. So it's not like you got a much less durable player than DeAndre Swift. So I'm excited to see it. Real quickly, just to touch on the wide receiver, because you did mention wide receiver. I don't know where he falls here in this. Who knows how far he makes it. But DeVante Parker, that's another signing in free agency. Eagles got maybe a wide receiver 3. There's been a lot made about his separation ability or lack thereof. But what do you say about DeVante Parker?
Well, my immediate reaction was he's always been an outside receiver for most of his NFL career. So my immediate thought was maybe this means that Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown spend a little bit more time in the slot, and that allows Parker to be on the outside. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's a lot like the Julio Jones edition last offseason, where he's an older receiver. He can't really separate much. He's a bigger body, so in the red zone they'll probably bring him in. But I don't think he's going to take over the primary wide receiver 3 spot. Based on his contract, it seems like it's only $1 million or so. So might not even, based on the way it's structured, he might not even make the final roster. It all depends on what they do in the draft and whatever happens in training camp. So, I mean, it's a solid addition. The guy that's kind of killed the Eagles in the past. So it'll be really nice to see him in the Eagles uniform and see what he can do there. But I mean, it's another low risk, high reward signing at the spot that they kind of have a question at right now.
There you go. Again, it can't hurt you too much. At least also to the fact of that the Patriots are taking most of that cap hit. So the 1.2 is not too bad. The other signing to mention is Matt Hennessy, the offensive lineman, guard/center. Depth signing as well, probably. But any immediate takeaways just for people that are not as familiar with him, what they should expect, anything from Hennessy?
I mean, that was a really good signing in my opinion, especially for the value. I don't even think the contract's been reported yet, so it's probably close to the league minimum or whatnot. Usually that's the case when the numbers aren't reported. So, I mean, he's a guy that started at guard and center. So, I mean, after Jason Kelce retired, obviously Cam Jurgens is going to slide over. But now you have a guy that can either potentially battle for the right guard spot, which I don't think he probably will. I think they'll just have him be that backup center in case Jurgens struggles. But it's a guy that played at a relatively high level before. He's been dealing with injuries. He's a local kid as well, so I mean they've kind of factored that in with him and Saquon Barkley. So we'll see if that Kenny Pickett now as well. So that kind of seems to be a common theme this offseason. But I mean he's a relatively young guy. I think he's only 26 years old. So, but he's played some games. There was some interest before the draft when he came out as well. So I mean it's worth a flyer because they need offensive line depth and they need offensive line depth on the interior because you're still not 100% certain if Jurgens can play center full time. So I mean. He played well to start at right guard last year. Then he kind of tailed off, dealt with some injuries. So it's interesting to have a guy that they can rely on to step in if Jurgens does struggle.
Yeah. And also, too, I mean, Tyler Steen, question of where he might play. They tried a little bit of right guard. I think it was one start and one other game of action, if I'm not mistaken. But, he's got a little bit there. But it does feel like the more that we continue to see the top 30 visits, we mentioned the importance of that. There's a lot of interior offensive linemen. Let's be honest. I mean, so far out of the top 30 visits, I'm not looking at the list, but I think it's like 5 maybe so far. You may know better than I do. But
Yep.
What do you make of the top 30 visits so far, especially in that position? And how early could you see the Eagles going with a move there?
So it seems like the second round is going to be the sweet spot for them where they're going to attack the interior offensive line because right now 9 top 30 visits have been reported. 5 of them are offensive linemen, and 4 of those offensive linemen are interior offensive linemen. I mean, and Tyler Guyton's the only other one, and some people say that to start his career he might play guard. So, I mean, you got Christian Mahogany out of Boston College, Cooper Beebe out of Kansas State, Brandon Coleman out of TCU, and Zach Zinter out of Michigan. They're all kind of projected in that day 2, early day 3 range. So now that they drop back into that 120th spot, that could be a spot for them too to address. But it seems like all of these guys pretty much played guard in college. It's not like they're conversion players where they played tackle and now they're moving down over to guard in the NFL. A lot of these guys, besides Guyton, all played guard in college. So, I mean, they'll be seamless fits. I feel like it makes sense because, like you said, Tyler Steen, he played last season, but very limited experience. I think they probably view him more in that Jack Driscoll role where he can kind of be a backup offensive lineman that can play either guard or tackle. So he's essentially your substitute at 4 different spots in case anything happens. So you kind of have him at those spots, and you have Fred Johnson at tackle, and then now you have Hennessy at the center. So, I mean, those 3 are probably your backup active guys on game day, and then you can plug in whoever this rookie that they decide to draft at right guard. So I feel like it'll be a good situation. There's a lot of good candidates at that range as well.
I'm excited. I like several of the names that you mentioned there too. It'll be interesting. I'm okay with. I will say this, and I've been on record a number of times. I'm okay if we go second round with a guard. I'm going to be a little bit upset if we take a guard or any offensive player probably at 22. I'm like, go defense. Take a corner would be great. If you want to take a linebacker, you want to take a D lineman. If someone falls there, that's okay. But yeah, I'm all right with it. If we go second round, that's fine. I'll always need the trenches for sure. Certainly, they have Saquon and Jalen protect him and all that. That's great. But let's move back to the defense though, because again, difference makers. There might not be a bigger difference maker than C.J. Gardner Johnson. We know this from his previous time in Philly. Again, mentioned this is probably the easiest pick to say, hey, where did Howie hit a home run on and get the most support, the least amount of, I mean, there's still arguments back and forth, but the least amount of arguments back and forth of whether this was a good move or not. But C.J. Gardner Johnson is back. What does he bring to this defense? We talked a number of times throughout the year of the weekly interviews and saying, oh my gosh, we lost another game. What's going on? All this other stuff. What does C.J. Gardner Johnson bring and impact the most for this defense moving forward in Vic Fangio?
Well, not like besides the takeaways, which they kind of struggled with last season, I feel like the biggest thing is his attitude and the swagger and the persona that he brings to the field. Because I was on this show that a couple weeks into last season, and you were saying how this team doesn't have an identity, and that's not going to be an issue anymore with this guy on the defense because he's going to punch you in the mouth and then he's going to tell you about it. So, I mean, it's hard to pass up on bringing back a guy like that. It seems like based on what he said, he wanted to be back. Kind of the agent kind of got in the middle, and they thought he can get more elsewhere. He went to Detroit for a season, so maybe whatever happened there. But it's clear that he fits what they need. They let go of Avonte Maddox. They let go of Kevin Byard, so they kind of have a void at safety and in the slot where he can play both of those positions. He played both of those positions for the Eagles in 2022, so we've seen him interact with the city. We've seen him fit on this exact team around Darius Slay, around James Bradbury, if he's still here. Who knows? But we've seen him fit in this team, and I feel like in Vic Fangio's defense, he fits even better than he did in Jonathan Gannon's defense, where he'll be used in a multitude of roles. He'll be able to kind of show one look pre-snap and then make an adjustment after the snap. So I feel like it was a no-brainer to bring him back. It was another move that I kind of doubted because I thought maybe there were a little bit more personal feelings that were hurt during that whole process last offseason. But it seems like they were able to kind of get past that. Obviously, money talks. But the main thing that a lot of people have been bringing up is his durability issues because he's missed a lot of games over the past 3 years. But, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's that much guaranteed money in his deal. It's essentially just a one-year deal at the end of the day with a minimal cap hit after that. So they'll kind of take it year by year. I think it's worth the risk because we've seen the difference that he made on the defense. So it'll be fun to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the durability too. That was the one part that I've seen a number of people mention as well. But I think you take the good with the bad, and you made a great point of what the guaranteed money is. It's like, okay, you're not locked in super long term. Granted, you have him for 3 years, but it's the $10 million guaranteed, and you don't have major cap ramifications for a player that's physical. And it comes with the territory. It's like we ask for a player to be physical and bring some intensity and personality and swag and all this other stuff, but it's like you're going out there and trying to lay the wood, then all of a sudden you can get injured, and we've seen him, a number of times. But I would rather that than, and I think most people would probably, hopefully, but from what we saw the past season, of a lack of identity and not really very many players that are willing to go out there and just hit some people. So I love it. Another move that I love is the new Agent Zero, apparently. Bryce Huff, for people that are not fully aware, but it sounds like he said, looking at numbers, Zero is open, and it kind of fits with his story being a UDFA. and highest paid, I guess, non-quarterback, highest paid UDFA in NFL history, getting the 3-year, $51 million deal. How good of a move is this? Because I know I've seen even some comments of like, hey, I was familiar with Huff, but I hadn't really watched his game from some people. But how good of a move is this for the Eagles and where he fits in this scheme?
Well, the best side to me usually when the Eagles or anybody signs a player is how the fans of their former team reacted. And I live in New York City, so I'm friends with a lot of Jets fans. A lot of my coworkers are Jets fans, and their instant move was like, "We hate you. Why did you do that?" Blah blah blah, because they know of my fandom. So, I mean, clearly they wanted him to return, but they have their own financial like, limitations. They want to adjust the offensive line, so they kind of had to let Huff go after they invested a first round pick in Will McDonald last year. So I mean, they seem upset about it, so that's always a good sign. The main thing, and you've seen a lot of people talk about it, is what he's done it has been in very limited snaps. He hasn't played 600, 700 snaps or 1,000 snaps like some of these other edge players have in the NFL. So it'll be interesting to see how he does. And they're clearly projecting him forward because he only rushed the passer 300 or so times last season, which was the most in his career, compared to guys like Josh Sweat and Haason Reddick who did it 700 times last year. So clearly they think that even though he'll play more snaps, that he can still continue that pace. A lot of people question his run defense, but I feel like the more you're on the field and he didn't really see those opportunities, so obviously he's going to struggle. But if he's playing more of a full-time role, I feel like he'll be able to adjust. But I mean, just the pass rushing upside is too good to pass up on. The guy's dominated. He's kind of the opposite of Devin White, where he's dominated all the analytical categories, where what people look at with pressure rate and all that stuff. So, I mean, it's worth taking a risk on. I said before the Eagles even signed him that if there was any player that I think could be the next Haason Reddick that kind of outplays their contract within the first season or so, I thought it was Huff. So, I mean, clearly the Eagles thought the same thing. They offered a very similar contract to Haason Reddick when they first signed him. Now, obviously, we'll see what happens with Haason Reddick in Philadelphia. But I think if Huff is playing that backup role in Philadelphia, that's even crazier because now he's coming in behind Josh Sweat and Haason Reddick or whatever the case might be. But I think they'll probably eventually move on from Reddick. I don't know. We'll see. But either way, I think it's a good signing with a lot of potential.
Yeah, I'm so hopeful for it. Again, I talked about it a little bit, but being a new agent zero, the fact that he comes in with the underdog story, that's an extra added benefit. But I mean, this has been him throughout his whole career, like 2-star recruit going to Memphis, coming to or going to the Jets as a UDFA and working his way on the team. All of a sudden, he's got a 3-year, $51 million deal, but he even said it in his press conference of just because I got the contract, like that doesn't change. I still got the chip on my shoulder because I look at the players even on this team and say like, these guys got drafted. They were all pinned as better than me, and the whole league thought that. So it's like, hey, you know what? Whatever gets you to have that extra fire, that extra motivation, I'm all for it. So I'm excited to see him, and we'll see the impact that it makes. Okay, so next, obviously, talking about Bryce Huff, it alludes into, or like you mentioned, Josh Sweat and Haason Reddick. The whole situation's there. Josh Sweat restructuring, going to be back with the Eagles, 1-year deal. I believe $10 million was what the guaranteed was, possibly up to $13 million. It's good, right? Because it's weird too. I mean, because there was a thought of him being gone because of the social media posts and saying I'm going to miss y'all, things like that. Curious, so this is more of, I guess asking you speculative or to speculate in this scenario, but what do you think occurred, the changes there? It did feel like Josh Sweat was very likely gone, and all of a sudden now he's back. And then we can get into the Reddick scenario too, kind of how that plays out.
So it's interesting because first we saw that Haason Reddick was being shopped, and then a couple days or weeks go by, and then all of a sudden Josh Sweat was also on the trading block, and then all of a sudden Josh Sweat's coming back. So I feel like they probably tested the market for both. I think the market's probably a lot less than they anticipated for both because we saw what Brian Burns got traded for, who a lot of people think is better than both of those players. So, I mean, if you're looking at, say, a third or fourth round pick for Josh Sweat at his age, it just doesn't make much sense to move on at that value because he's on a relatively decent contract. He restructured it to basically make it even more team friendly. So, I mean, it makes more sense to kind of take him into next season. And if he does leave because he's still only going to be 26, 27, then they can maybe get a compensatory pick. The thing is with Reddick, it's interesting because of his age. Obviously, he's probably the best pass rusher of those three, but his age is obviously a factor, and the fact that he wants a new deal is a big factor as well. So, I mean, I don't think he's going to get Brian Burns money because I think that contract was a little questionable personally, but he's going to get a decent payday, and it's just a matter of a team actually trading for him because the value probably is not where the Eagles want it right now. So it might be a situation that they carry into the actual draft where a team kind of misses on an edge player that they were looking at, and then they're kind of like, all right, we told Philly we'd give him a third or fourth round pick for Reddick or whatever. Whatever he gets traded for, I'm sure fans won't be happy about it because it probably won't match the caliber of player that he is. But given the signing of Huff and the restructure of Sweat, it kind of makes sense for them to eventually move on from Reddick at some point.
I'm afraid, yeah, I'm with you. I'm afraid of that too. Honestly, whenever it happened, it's like, okay, well, the writing's somewhat on the wall. To ask in a more like, I guess, optimistic way or optimistic tone, is there a possibility? Do you see it as any chance that Haason Reddick could still come back and I mean, I guess obviously it takes significantly less money, but in a realistic terms, for what he's worth and where you see potential teams, like you mentioned, maybe a draft night trade. Is there? I guess what's the likelihood? What's the percentage if you were going to throw it out there of Eagles being able to retain Reddick at this point in your mind?
Well, based on my recent history with percentages, I don't know like to do that. But
maybe we can reverse jinx it.
I'd probably put it at like maybe 60% chance he's leaving, 40% chance he's returning because his cap number is really reasonable for the Eagles still. And now that they have Huff under contract, I'm sure his first year cap hit isn't going to be anything crazy. Josh Sweat restructured as well. So I just feel like they're going to be in a situation where they could keep all three and just roll into next season and see what happens. And compensatory picks are always going to be a factor. So the Eagles have used that to their advantage in recent years. So, I mean, they could just do that if they don't plan on being very active in free agency next offseason. I know their cap situation is a little bit different. They won't have as much money to spend. So if they don't like what they see or what they're receiving in trade offers now, just carry him throughout the season and see what happens. But the only thing is you risk a guy being like Haason Reddick. It seems like he's a little bit of an emotional guy where he won't like that they paid Bryce Huff ahead of him, basically instead of him, even though it's going to be probably less money than he's asking for. But he might view that as disrespect and he might not want to play and he'll just force his way out of Philadelphia. So, I mean, this is all speculative. We know he wants to play in Philadelphia, supposedly. So if they want to work something out, they can. I feel like there's still a chance that they work out a short-term extension where they add 2 or 3 years onto his deal, lower his cap hit, make it more backloaded, or whatever the case might be. But there's options for him to stay. It's just a matter of both parties wanting to do so.
I would love it. I would honestly. I know it's kind of a little bit more of a short-term move, possibly like you're talking about there. But if I mean, the idea or the thought even of having those three in kind of a rotational, and obviously we've talked about Nolan Smith in past episodes too. If Eagles view him, they're going to get him out there more snaps. Howie's alluded to also Fangio's scheme, kind of utilizing that athleticism. So there's excitement there, but I'm glad to hear there's a chance. You're telling me there's a chance based off the percentages. So we'll see how
it's not 0.0.
So it's not zero. It's not zero, which I'll take that. I'll definitely take that. Talking about extensions and contracts and everything else too, another name that continues to be thrown out there from fans certainly, but comments that happen quite a bit is when is DeVonta Smith extension getting done? He's eligible for an extension. How he loves to do moves early rather than wait till last second. Certainly if you can get ahead of the market, but DeVonta Smith, we've mentioned it a couple times. Do you feel like anything's changed based on these moves here? How soon could you see an extension getting done? Where would you predict on that?
I think it's still going to happen this offseason. My guess probably be more around the draft. I believe that's when they signed Jalen Hurts to his extension. So probably around April, May or so is when we'll see that happen. Calvin Ridley already got paid a ton of money, so I'm sure DeVonta Smith's agent is happy about that. So, I mean, but he was going to probably make more money than that regardless because he was going to beat out A.J. Brown's contract. It's just a matter of trying to beat out Amon-Ra St. Brown, C.D. Lamb, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, like a lot of those guys who are more in that younger demographic where around his age, around the year that he got drafted, around his talent level. So we'll see what happens there, but I think it's only a matter of time. It's going to get done this offseason because they don't want to carry this into next season where he potentially has to play on his fifth-year option the following year, whatever the case might be. So, I mean, they're going to get it done. Clearly, he wants to be here. Clearly, they're going to want to keep him around. He's a foundational player for them on offense. So it's just a matter of them just agreeing the terms, and it'll be done in probably April or May.
Quick note, too. Thank you to Tennessee for the A.J. Brown trade after the Calvin Ridley news. I get that it's a different regime, and I've got Titans fans who are like, no, you can't blame the current one because this is not they're investing a receiver finally. But still, you look at like the contract ramifications and everything else, you're like, you could have just kept A.J. Brown and then done the same thing and not have Calvin Ridley. But, hey, that's the decision they made, and we were very glad to that.
And it's just kind of wild to think about, like, the chain of events that occurred after that. So, like, And the video got out there in their draft room where it looked like Mike Vrabel was pretty upset when they did the trade.
Yeah.
And then now, fast forward a year or two, and now he's been fired or whatever the case might be from there. So who knows? They might still have Vrabel as their head coach if AJ Brown was still there. So
That's true.
I don't know. Was that pick really worth it? So I guess we'll find out.
Hopefully for them, but it worked out for us, so we're glad to have AJ. That's very good. Okay, last question here. Again, this has been a wild first week of free agents that we had. Tons of unexpected moves. Howie flipping the script, going after linebackers and running backs and everything else that we talked here before. But given the moves that he's made, some of the holes that may still be out there, areas to go after. We've heard some more rumors and speculation in some places, but any area is specific, or even a player if you want to throw that out there, but any area that you feel like the Eagles will still go after and target in free agency.
I mean, everybody's favorite target is Justin Simmons because of his tie to Vic Fangio and the fact that he's still available. So, I mean, that's going to be someone that people always kind of ask the Eagles to target, but I just don't know if they're going to make another big move this offseason. I think more of like a trade involving Reddick for maybe another player and like a late pick is something to watch for as far as like a big player acquisition. I think you're going to see more of like the Orenberg signings where it's going to be like a 1-year deal, low money, low guaranteed money, where it's kind of like a little bit more of a high reward, low risk, high reward situation where they're not investing a ton of money. So I know there's some big names still out there, but I would look for more like lower bargain bin kind of deals. I think you could see some of them add somebody at corner still, maybe along the interior of the defensive line. They haven't really addressed it all yet. So we'll see what happens, but I think those would be the two spots. I thought quarterback was going to be the next spot because a lot of people were saying that Easton Stick was going to be a target for them, but obviously they made the trade for Kenny Pickett. So now I think cornerback, inside interior defensive line, and then maybe another safety, but I don't think it'll be a huge name.
Okay, there you go. We'll see. Maybe it ends up being Justin Simmons though. Maybe there's a they still go with that. They shock everybody. But no, I'm kind of with you. I feel like it's less likely. But we'll see, because Howie's been surprising this entire free agency, and who knows. I will say also, too, I'm extremely excited for the draft. Cannot wait. All these moves get me even more excited because now the mock drafts have a little bit more meaning. I'm like, oh, okay, hey, you filled a hole here. I don't exactly have to draft this as much now. So if you're not already, please make sure to go follow Anthony. The best coverage, I'm telling you, the news, information, Pro Football Network. I guess it's almost every morning, right? It's a morning mock draft that you do, too. So you've done, I don't know, hundreds to this point, it feels like, because you've probably done a lot more than what you just post. So
yeah, unfortunately, yes.
Very well versed. But yes, seriously, go follow Anthony. Appreciate you hopping on too, as always. But until next time, everybody, we will see you. Go Birds.